Hey guys, so this is a re-upload of a video I posted a week or so ago of the UTV series ranking the seasons. YouTube put a copyright restriction on the video for me having used a few clips. I'm not gonna go on a full-blown rant about it, but it's super frustrating that I had just a few video clips with no audio, me talking over it, reversed the footage, put filters over the top. Just had a few short clips to highlight the portions of the seasons I was talking about. I've taken all that out with this, so hopefully it's something you still enjoy without having those visuals. If this is your second time watching it, I really appreciate you being here. If this is your first time watching, welcome. I hope you enjoy the video. As I said, I won't go to full-blown rant with it, but super frustrating. I love YouTube as a platform, but some of their policies I don't fully understand all the time. So thanks for watching, and here's the video. Hey, great to have you here. So today we're gonna take a look at the U TV series. Hopefully the acoustics in this room are okay. I have a little bit different setup for today, so let me know what you guys think with that. Jumping into the point of today's video, ranking and taking a look at the U TV show. So this is a show that's on Netflix. It's been one that's been talked about. It's relatively popular, I would say. Their 5th season's coming out this year, so popular enough that it's gone on for 5 seasons, I would say. So this is one that was pitched to me as this may be of interest if you're a fan of Dexter. Me being a fan of Dexter, I was like, okay, let's check this thing out. Is it similar, or what's kind of the situation here? I knew it was around some main character who has a killing tendency and revolved around that same similarity as far as how Dexter has those urges as well. So jumping into the rankings, as a whole, while, as I said, Dexter is a show I really enjoyed and U was pitched as being similar, I wasn't as big a fan of the U TV series. I would say, encompassing all 4 seasons, I would rate the show as relatively average. There's definitely parts throughout the series that I really enjoyed that were really great, but as a whole, I would say I would put it at around an average. Not something I would overly recommend, but hopefully you enjoyed it, and something that keeps you interested enough to keep watching. It's something good to have on in the background, something good that you get at least some interest from, in my opinion. So I would probably, if I'm rating it, rate it around that 5 out of 10 scale, if I'm being realistic with the ratings of things here. So jumping into my rankings, the 4th position for the series, we have season 4. So this is one, from what I've seen online, a lot of people view this as their favorite season, which kind of surprised me. I mean, it's the most unique, I would say, of any of the 4 seasons, so maybe that's why some people really enjoy it, if it's more of their style. But it feels like the plot gets a little bit too silly when it comes to season 4. And the realism, while already was a little bit stretched, gets really pushed out in this season, especially building upon what you've done already thus far. So I just feel like to this point, for our main character not to be caught feels a little bit unrealistic, in my opinion. But it's still enjoyable. So starting things off as far as how the plot goes. So you have him coming off of season 3. He winds up going to England to find Marianne, who he was interested in at the end of season 3, finds her there. She is not interested in him. She's shocked to see him because he ended season 3 expecting to be dead, and she's terrified of him, essentially tells him to go away. And you have Love's family, so the woman he was with in season 3, they have somebody come after him in season 4, just approaches him saying, I can help you create a new identity, you just have to take out Marianne. And he says, okay, I'll do so. Winds up stealing one of her necklaces to prove that he took her out, even though he did not choose to do so. And is then granted a new identity of Jonathan, who is a professor in England at that point. So that's how we kind of transition out of season 3 into season 4 as a new life. A lot of that, as I said, feels a little bit of a stretch, but okay, we'll play along for now. You have him with this new identity as a professor. He winds up having a party with I believe he's a fellow professor, Malcolm, who lives in the same building as him, and they wind up going crazy, and sure enough, he wakes up the next day and sees that Malcolm is dead in his apartment, and he's not sure what happened because he took a lot of drugs or did a lot of crazy things the prior night, so he's trying to retrace his steps to figure out why Malcolm is here, why he's dead, which, if I'm being honest, feels like a little bit repetitive because we did that story previously with the whole, oh, you were on drugs, you partied too much, and you have a dead body, and now we have to retrace your steps as far as figuring out how this dead body got here. Did you do it? Did somebody else do it? What happened? So that formula has been done once before in the show already. So already there, it felt like, okay, I'm not sure I need to go through the same process again. But then we kind of take a turn as far as how they handle it. They turned it into a bit of a, in my opinion, kind of a knives out situation where it's a whodunit situation where you have the various friend group of Malcolm and the people around their friend group, and Joe, our main character, gets to know, or I guess Jonathan in this season, gets to know each of them individually and tries to figure out, okay, what's going on, who is responsible for this, and a lot of conflict happens. You get more deaths that occur throughout the show. Ultimately, we get the reveal that a character that he's familiar with, named Reese, is responsible for the kills. And therefore, Reese wants him to take out Tom Lockwood, who is a father of the girl that that Jonathan or Joe is interested in. And he winds up going to do that. And then eventually we get the twist of the season, which I didn't mind. I felt like I wasn't enjoying the season up to that point. So maybe if I was, the twist would have been a little bit more satisfying. But because I was just going along with the show, I don't think the twist hit as hard for me. But we get the whole Fight Club reveal where Reese is in Joe or Jonathan's head and that he's kind of disassociating when it comes to his daily life. He'll just kind of black out and Reese will take over as far as doing things, and then we'll come back to Joe or Jonathan and they'll be continuing from there. So he's been interacting with this person who wasn't actually a person the whole time. And it's fun how they do that. And as I said, I know it's been done before in other forms of media, so not overly creative, but a fun introduction of having that aspect included in the show. And then you have, as I said, Joe ultimately winds up killing Tom Lockwood, the father of, and I know I'm bouncing around a little bit, but some of the stuff's not overly relevant, I would say. Kills the father of the girl he's been interested in. So originally the girlfriend of the first guy who showed up dead, he gets with her, and then from there he kills him. And the whole time he's had Marianne trapped in one of his typical cells. I'm a little confused how he always gets these things. He somehow finds a space to do this at and builds his whole contraption where he has her held up the whole time. One of his students winds up going in and essentially having a rescue plan for her where she fakes her death and then Joe lets her go, and then the student comes and saves her and revives her essentially. So Marianne ultimately gets away and Joe thinks she's dead as far as how the season ends. But then we have that student and her friend who are trying to make it obvious that Joe did this and report him. And then it gets a little silly at the end where Joe kills the friend, and then the main girl who's trying to get the cops on him, he pins the death of the friend on her, saying, you know, it gets a little crazy. You're like, I don't know why she wouldn't more so push for, you know, Joe did this, but he has the power apparently and is able to convince her that she's going to be the fall person for this. And ultimately he winds up with another powerful person in Kate, the daughter of Tom Lockwood, and they move to New York and are able to grant Joe his life back. So it felt like this season, as I said, got the plot a little bit too silly. There was characters I didn't overly care about. So the characters that were involved in kind of that whodunit situation, none of them were overly interesting in my opinion. You have Kate, who's part of that group, who gets most of the screen time, I would say. She's an interesting story. There's another friend who gets forced into a marriage. I feel like none of that really winds up mattering or is very consequential. I don't feel like any of those characters really amounted to much. So overall, characters involved here were pretty weak. Story pretty weak. They have the unique twist of the whole Fight Club in your head thing, which it was okay, but as a whole, I felt like this was just an okay season, and I'm not really sure where they go from here because you have them back in New York, I guess. Are they going to have conflict rise with Kate and then Marianne's going to show up again? Who knows? But as I said, there's only 5 seasons, so we'll see what winds up coming of that. But this is season 4, ranked in my number 4 spot. Number 3 spot, we have season 1. So this is where I first started, as I said, being a Dexter fan got me interested in learning more about the show. And we start off with Joe, our main character, who is stalking Guinevere Beck, who is the main, I guess, female love interest of this season. And he's just a normal guy as far as how things look on the outside. He manages a bookstore, lives in a regular apartment across from kind of a troubled family there. And he becomes very obsessed with Beck. He winds up following her around, getting her phone, just doing really creepy things. And in my opinion, this is why I don't hold you in as high regard as I do Dexter. You know, Dexter has a character who is a serial killer, but he winds up being very likable. And I felt like you really struggles with making Joe a likable character. He just doesn't, I don't know if the character doesn't have the charisma as Dexter, or he's not put in positions that make him likable. I think that's probably the most part is that, you know, Dexter's taking out bad guys, and he does it in a way that you are rooting for him typically. Whereas Joe, when I was watching this, he comes across as very creepy. He's essentially stalking Beck to wind up persuading her to want to be with him. And that's not overly somebody you want to root for. It feels a little bit weird to be watching that. Ultimately, in the season, he winds up killing Benji, so her former boyfriend, who they've kind of had an on and off with. And they try to pitch it as, oh, he's kind of a bad guy. He's done some bad stuff in the past. But even then, I'm like, I don't think that Benji deserved to die. So starting off with Joe not being very high as far as somebody I'm rooting for, and he's the main protagonist of the show. Similar to Dexter, he has his inner monologue talking throughout most of the show. So you have his thoughts being narrated over, and I don't know, I felt like they did somewhat of a weak job, in my opinion, as far as getting Joe out the gate as being somebody we're going to be rooting for. And maybe their point was you're not supposed to necessarily be rooting for him, but that makes it a little bit harder to enjoy the show if you're just watching things happen and don't necessarily like what's happening or have a rooting interest. Like throughout the whole season, I kind of felt, you know, if Joe gets caught or if he gets turned over, I wouldn't mind. Obviously, knowing there's four to five seasons, that wasn't going to happen. But it's, you know, I didn't care about what happened to Joe in that first season, which is not something I think you want from your main character. So we get a little bit of character development. Obviously, it's the first season. We have Joe establish his rapport about how he is in his bookstore. He has a coworker there that he developed a relationship with. He has his home life, as I mentioned. He lives across from a woman who has a troubled man in her life and her kid. I felt like this was the strongest part of the show. It almost gave that Peter Parker type vibe where he's in his apartment complex and this kid looks up to Joe, and Joe gives him books to read, and the kid gets abused for the most part by Ron, I believe was his name. And Paco, the kid, he, as I said, he's probably one of the stronger parts. He is that relationship with Joe. He's one of the few reasons why there's a interest in rooting for Joe, is that you want to support the kid. The kid's attached to him, so you want good to happen to Joe, I think, because of Paco's involvement in his life. You get some more development, as I said, with the characters in Beck's friend group, and after taking out Benji, you kind of have a next up in line where Joe's seeing, okay, which of your friends don't like me? So then after that, he latches onto Peach, who thinks Joe's a weirdo, and probably rightfully so. And he winds up attacking her in a park. She recovers from it, and she never saw him, so it wasn't a major deal there, but it's viewed as just kind of a mugging situation. Ultimately, Peach calls Beck out to hang out with her for the weekend, and Joe realizes Peach likes Beck romantically, so she is somewhat tugging on Beck, which is conflicting with Joe's interest in doing so. So Joe goes out there, and as Beck and them leave, he gets in an altercation with Peach where she has a gun, and they go back and forth. Joe winds up killing Peach, and moving on from there, it's viewed as, you know, she did it to herself type situation. And it kind of continues that cycle of, okay, I'm going to take out anything in your way, anything stopping us from being together, I'm going to remove that obstacle. They have a little off and on throughout the whole season. They wind up getting back together towards the end of the show, I think like episode 8 or 9 or so, you know, previously Joe's with a woman who's friends with his neighbor, but that falls apart and he gets back with Beck, and ultimately Beck finds out Joe's has this stash of evidence that is kind of his trophies, I guess. If we're relating it to Dexter, it's his like blood slides, and there's just phones from her and the guy he killed and other creepy items from her. It's just a completely damning situation where he is clearly the only one responsible for this. So she freaks out and tries to leave, and he winds up not letting her, ultimately capturing her. Separately from that, we also have Ron, as I said, the neighbor's love interest, who Joe also winds up killing, and to help Paco, essentially, he wants him to have a better life. So taking Ron out of the equation is his way of helping him with that. And then we have Joe and Beck. So he essentially captures Beck and puts her in the same type of chamber we had in season 4. This is the first time seeing it. This one makes more sense. It's in the basement of the bookstore. So he has a place to have it. There's a reason he has it. It's to maintain the book quality. It was there previously from the previous owner, who he has a relationship with that we see throughout the series as well. He puts Beck in there, same place he put Benji at one point. And they have a back and forth. She tries to get away and locks him in there. And sure enough, he has a key that's in there as well. She tries to yell to Paco and doesn't get any help. He ultimately captures her and winds up killing her, framing the therapist who she had been seeing. So throughout the time he realized that she was seeing the therapist romantically, and he got jealous of that. So he thought about taking him out at one point, but ultimately just decides, I'm going to frame you for her death, and winds up writing a book about it from Beck and just pushing it out there. The show ends with Candace, the former girlfriend of Joe that we hadn't seen in the show. She was just shown in flashbacks and so forth. Shows up at the very end, essentially confronting him, and it's kind of a cliffhanger ending where he's just in shock that she's there. So overall, I thought the show was okay. I felt like this was a very middle of the road introduction to the show. As I said, challenges it came with were getting you to like Joe. He's not somebody that I personally felt attached to. He stretched a little bit too far to have somebody, if somebody does something wrong, you can still relate to that person or still root for them throughout the show. I felt like he stretched it a little bit too far in having that happen for him. He killed people that may have been bad in some ways, but they weren't necessarily deserving of death, and his creepiness with the stalking just feels it's hard to root for. So I'm not sure if most fans really like him as a character, or if they just like the show. Be interested to see kind of your thoughts there, if you've watched the show, and your thoughts on how you view Joe as the protagonist. Is he somebody that you're rooting for, or is he somebody you're just watching alongside and entertained by? Overall, as I said, very middle of the road season and start to the show for me. It didn't reel me in, but I just continued kind of slogging through it, hoping that we may get some more development with it. And it was okay. Characters were decent, I would say, overall. If I'm rating characters that I enjoyed the most, Paco was the one I mentioned. I thought he had the best relationship with him, and it was something that was very of interest to him. There's a part at one point where Joe almost gets caught by the cops, involving Ron, Paco's not father, but father figure, and ultimately gets away with that. So I would say the drama and the enjoyment are generally when he's involved, as far as being that mentor figure. You're showing the non-creepy side of Joe is when he really shines as a character, I would say. So overall, as I said, have the first season ranked number 3, or ranked 3rd. Then ranked 2nd. So I kind of bounced back and forth between these two, which one I like the most, which one I like second. I feel pretty confident going with this ranking. Coming in at 2nd place, we have season 3. So this is after Joe ultimately leaves LA. He has this relationship with Love at this point. So him and Love are together. You have Henry, their new child, and they ultimately move to the suburbs, trying to get away, start a new life, kind of start fresh situation. First episode, it hints at this at the end of the prior season, but Joe is interested in seeing the woman that's next to him, the neighbor he's grown fond of, which seems like a repeated theme with this, but by the end of episode 1, Love kills Natalie, the neighbor, out of just not wanting her in the picture. She's attracted to Joe. She wants none of that, so she ultimately kills Natalie out of spite, and it's enjoyable watching her and Joe kind of struggle with, she does something crazy because she loves Joe, and Joe comes back and sees it, and he's just flabbergasted that she would do that, which is funny because Joe would do something similar, but he's just trying to pick up the pieces, clean up the mess, and he's just, their back and forth is enjoyable for this season, I would say. So you have them clear that up and get rid of the evidence. They wind up moving around a few times, and then you have somebody else comes into the store, Gil, who their kid wound up getting sick at one point, getting the measles, and they wind up finding out that Gil was the one who spread it because his family doesn't believe in getting any kind of medical intervention for treatment of preventing any diseases in the future, so they didn't get any protection there, and ultimately Love is furious because, you know, her kid was impacted because you chose to not get your immunization injections or anything like that. Like, you wanted to be natural, which put my kid in jeopardy. So she attacks him, puts him downstairs. They wind up setting up similar to season 1 and season 4. They have their own little contraption where they have an excuse here where they put bread and like ingredients for the bakery that they have in there, but they have their same kill room area or hostage room, I would say. And Gil wants to be being put in there. And throughout that time, you also get Love flirting with a guy named Theo, who is actually the kid of their neighbor, who's Matthew, who was in a relationship with Natalie. So weird tie-in there. Ultimately, with Gil, you wind up him being framed for the kill for Natalie. So they wind up showing Gil information that his son has done bad things, and Gil is traumatized by it and winds up taking his own life. Joe and Love capitalize on that, and they plant his body elsewhere that makes it imply that he felt guilty after taking out Natalie, and that is then wrapped up in theory. We have, as I said, Love's flirting with Theo. Joe's flirting with Marianne, who's at the library that he now has a job at, similar to the first season. He was in a bookstore. He wants to do something similar, so he goes to the library, works there, meets the girl there. They have interactions as well. There's conflict with her and her home life. There's a few other episodes that are not necessarily important, but enjoyable to watch or funny to watch. You have one where Joe goes out into the wild and camping with a few of the guys in the area, and it's just kind of silly how they show their interaction and their relationship. But fast forward, you have one of their friend groups that was there at that camping wants to swing with Joe and Love, and they ultimately engage in that, and then Love, of course, freaks out because she's attached to Joe, and anything involving him she's not down for. So she freaks out, and they go downstairs and wind up yelling that she killed Natalie, and she's like, "Did you think they heard us say that?" They go upstairs and they try to like feel them out. It's a funny interaction. Ultimately, they realize, yeah, they heard you. So they each go for the similar partner. So Joe goes for the guy, Love goes for the girl. They wind up capturing them, essentially, putting them in that same glass chamber, and are not sure how to handle them. You have a lot of things going around this time. As I mentioned, Marianne's got a troubled home life, and Joe tries to take care of that, so he kills this guy named Ryan, who's the ex of Marianne, who's the father of the kid that's creating problems for Marianne. So Joe's like, let me make your life easy, and I'll take him out. So he does that. You have Theo come to the store later on, and Love winds up pushing him down some stairs thinking she killed him. Joe winds up finding out he didn't die, sends him to the hospital, and ultimately it culminates with Love trying to paralyze Joe with, I think it's called aconite, and we find out Joe was aware of this taking place, so he prepared for it. Ultimately stabs Love with the aconite. She winds up dying from it, and Joe frames the situation as being a kind of murder-suicide situation where he blows up the house, he cuts off a couple of his toes to implied that he was there and he could be dead in the fire somewhere. So it felt unnecessary, but they tried to pitch it as, oh, this is believable because his body was somewhat found. So they definitely won't know you're alive now, which, okay, I guess. It definitely felt like while all the seasons have a little bit hard to believe situations, this one got a little bit wild where we just start knocking people off. Every time Love gets a little bit jealous of Joe, she just starts whacking people. So it felt more believable in here than season 4 because they had somebody to help cover it up. It was a smaller town, so while it was stretching believability, it felt like I was more willing to accept it, and I was also enjoying the season more, so that added to me forgiving the possibility of, is this realistic with all this going on? You're not going to be accused of any of this. So overall, I thought it was a relatively strong season. I enjoyed it. It was almost like reality TV type situation where it's a little bit like, should I be liking this? But it was funny and enjoyable enough that it kept a little bit of suspense as well, where you're along for the ride. As far as the characters for this one, I thought they were relatively strong. You had the different love interests for the main characters. You had the friend groups as well. They were interesting in their own ways. And I don't know, I thought the season was a step up from the prior two. So I would say, if I'm giving feedback on each of the 4 seasons, I would say I did not like the 4th season. I didn't really love the first. The first was like maybe averagey. It wasn't until seasons 3, then 2 that I would say, yes, I enjoyed these, and I would give a recommendation to watch them. Granted, you have to watch at least season 1 to get to those at that point, but season 2 and 3, I feel like the strong points for this show thus far. So that was season 3 at the 2nd place position. That leaves, obviously, number 1 is season 2. So coming off fresh from the first season where, as I mentioned, Candace has approached him and Joe ultimately winds up fleeing to Los Angeles. He pitches this as, hey, where's the one place you would never expect me to go? Someplace I hate, someplace like LA, because typically he would want to be hiding somewhere more remote where he's not the center of attention with a lot of loud people and things like that. So we start off with him becoming this new identity as Will, and he gets a job at a grocery where he's working kind of the book cafe section at Anavrin, which is reverse Nirvana, kind of a fun play on words there of including that. And we eventually learn, while Joe has this identity as Will, he wound up taking that from somebody. He wasn't just given, hey, here's your new identity. He captured somebody else and took on their identity instead. So a bit of a twist with that. We also find out he picked his apartment location because it was across from the girl who works at the cafe, who he obviously went to go see at that cafe and is now working there as well. So kind of an interesting, we know he's a bit off the wheels, but he was pitching it as, oh, this is a new life, I'm not doing this anymore. And then sure enough, we find out, yeah, you're doing this again. And ultimately, he gets randomly attacked by a guy named Jasper as Will, and he's like, I don't know who you are, what's going on here? Finds out that Will was in some trouble with this guy and needs to pay him some money. He winds up thinking it's $3,000 and gets that by doing his book type work where he's recreating an old book and selling it for money, and gives it to Jasper, and Jasper winds up cutting off his finger and saying, you owe me 50 grand. And Joe is confused because Will told him it was 3, goes back to him, tries to figure out a plan for ultimately taking out Jasper or ultimately paying him, and he's really forced with just taking on Jasper ultimately. He's not able to get the 50 grand, and Jasper comes after him, and he winds up knocking him out and killing him, and I think he uses the cafe like meat grinder even to take out his body. So pretty grotesque stuff, but takes out Jasper, the hitman who was after Will, and keeps Will trapped. Once again, we have the glass case. This one's, it's marginally more believable than season 4. You have this setup in this storage container. So he purchases a storage container and sets up his glass room there as well. So overall, as far as like where he has those at, I feel like season 4 is the worst as far as believability as how you could have put this together. I know season 1, he kind of adopted it from the previous bookstore owner. Season 2, now he builds one in a storage container. Okay, you got a storage container, you can do that. Season 3 puts it in the bottom of their bakery. Still kind of a stretch, but okay, we'll accept that as well. From there, has Will trapped up, so not really sure what to do with him. He doesn't want to kill him because he's not a bad guy. He's just a complication to his plans. And separately, you have his relationship with the 2 neighbors of his who are sisters. So we have Delilah and Ellie, the younger sister, and they have a fun relationship with each other, just banter back and forth. And then we have Delilah share a story of how she was assaulted by this guy named Henderson. And Ellie, the younger sister, starts hanging out with him. So you can tell there's a little bit of conflict developing there. Joe also develops this relationship with Love, who is the new girl at the cafe or grocery that he's grown fond of, who he's looking through his telescope at in his apartment and just trying to get attached to her. Similar to Beck's situations, just repeated here with Love, trying to eliminate as many obstacles, trying to get with just you. And you have a very complicated relationship here where Love has a brother named 40, and he's a very large part of her life that he's in the way a lot of times of her relationships, but Joe doesn't want to jeopardize that. He realizes the importance that 40 has with her, so tries to tiptoe around that and become okay with 40 essentially. 40 is also friends with this Henderson guy, so they go to his party, get to know him. Joe questions if he wound up doing these things, but he winds up getting information on Henderson and uses Will, who's trapped in that glass container, to hack his computer and get information. Can't find a whole lot on him. He winds up hearing from 40 that he has this room in his house that's meant for these things that he's doing inappropriate things at, and takes that information. Separately, we have Candace, who was looking for him at the beginning of the season, the former girlfriend, who winds up dating 40. They wind up getting a relationship together, and Joe winds up going to Henderson's house when Ellie's there. He winds up finding evidence. He winds up seeing that Henderson's trying to drug Ellie, so he gets in an altercation with Henderson separately when Ellie's passed out, and winds up knocking him down the stairs and accidentally killing him. And he has to clean up the situation in a very sloppily way and get out of there. Then we have Candace, who winds up approaching. They go on a retreat. There's a lot of more backstory, but it's not overly relevant. We have Candace, who winds up approaching Love when she's trying to get information on Joe, and spills the whole story about him being this bad guy. He's done these bad things. They wind up breaking up from it, but Joe winds up staying in LA. I don't know necessarily why. I don't feel like there wasn't really a strong case for him doing so, but he stays there. He does wind up letting the real Will go, which I was a fan of. Honestly, as far as characters throughout the entire 4 seasons, the guy who plays Will is recognizable. He was in, what's the movie, Accepted, I think it was. But he was a really enjoyable character to watch, and I'm glad to let him go. I'm surprised to let him go, because typically it's one of those situations where you know who I am, so you got to go. Doesn't wind up killing him. He just trusts that you're going to keep your word. You're not going to tell anybody about this. You're going to flee the country, and I'm going to be Will from here on. So lets him go. Did like that. But winds up getting his identity given away, so he winds up staying. And then they start seeing other people, stuff like that. He goes on dates, and she winds up seeing a former friend of her ex. Separately, we have Delilah getting more information. She realizes what happened with Henderson and knew he was a bad guy and things like that. She winds up finding the storage facility of Joe, and as soon as she's going to leave, he shows up and captures her. He plans on letting her go, though. He says, you know, if you give me X amount of time, I will get my things in order and leave, and you will be set free with these timed handcuffs. From there, he's going to do his plan of leaving. And then he gets captured by a bunch of guys and realizes that 40 has captured him, and they're put in this room where they have to work on this script, and he can't leave. Otherwise, he's going to get shot by this guy in the hallway, which is a bit absurd, but we're going along with it because it's at least enjoyable to watch. They wind up taking drugs that night. A lot of stuff happens. He doesn't know what's going on. He goes back to the place where he has Delilah captured, and he realizes that she's dead in there. And as I said, here's where they've done it before. We have Delilah dead, and he's not sure how she died. Season 4 copied that, where we have the first character die, that neighbor character winds up dying, and he has to figure out, oh, how did you die? Ultimately, he wound up doing it at that point. But this situation, he was on drugs. He's trying to figure out what happened here, and a lot takes place of him trying to backtrack and figure out what took place. You ultimately get him in the cage with the Delilah throughout that time, and Candace shows up, locks Joe in, and then she winds up calling Love because she wants to prove, this guy's crazy, you need to know this guy is not safe type thing. Well, here's probably the best part of the entire series in my opinion, and it's a twist that I didn't necessarily see coming, so that makes it even greater. You have Candace tell Love all these bad things about Joe. Joe admits he didn't know if he killed Delilah, but he's like, yeah, I did it. It was me. And the response is they wind up walking away, and Love winds up killing Candace. And they're like, what? What's going on here? And then you find out Love killed Delilah as well. And there's some flashbacks shown. And essentially, Love is as crazy as Joe was in season 1 for Beck for Joe in this season. So she is taking on the I'm a psycho and need to be with you and just you situation that Joe was doing in season 1. So it's a bit of a reversal surprise there. And Joe winds up wanting to kill her because like, it's ironic because he's a psycho too, but he's like, you are crazy, I can't be with you. Tries to kill her. She says that she's pregnant, so he stops and he's like, oh, I gotta take care of this kid now. And I wasn't sure if she was gonna be at that point, if that was like a made up thing, but turns out she was pregnant with a kid. And you have 40, who, I don't know, like he starts to think Joe killed Beck, obviously with the backstory of Beck's stuff. He catches on to that. We have Joe send Ellie off, the younger sister, with money because she's being involved in the situation. He wants her to get out of town. 40 approaches Joe and Love and corners them and says, Joe's a bad guy, winds up holding a gun to him. This was a bit predictable. You have the cop who's outside come in, shoots 40, and now 40's blamed for the killing of Candace and I think even Henderson. And so Joe's gone away with it. They wind up moving to the suburbs of California to live their life with a new son. I forgot to mention, in season 3, Joe winds up giving the kid away to one of his coworkers that was at the library to take care of his kid. So that's why the kid's not in season 4 anymore. But overall, I felt like while there's a lot of jumbleness in every season, I felt like season 2's characters I enjoyed a lot more. You had, as I mentioned, the actual Will. I really enjoyed his character. You had Jenna Ortega as the younger sister, as Ellie. She was good. The older sister was good as well, who played Delilah. It was unfortunate she wound up dying because I enjoyed her as a character. And I felt like the twist of that season specifically was great. You had the whole Love is actually crazy as well, and she's the killer too. So seasons 2 and 4 were the only ones who really tried to go very twisty, I would say, where you had Love being the killer, and then you had it being in Joe's head as far as Reese being part of him. And I think season 2 pulled it off a lot better than season 4 did. And the build-up throughout, unrelated to the twist in season 2, was a lot greater in my opinion too. So those are my thoughts. There also were some flashbacks of Joe as a kid. I didn't really care for those. I felt like this character's backstory when he was a child that's trying to justify or explain how he is the way he is and things like that. Okay, I get it gives him a little bit more depth and so forth, but like I don't feel like any of those scenes ever added a lot of value to me. You know, you get his being bullied and then trying to stick up for the teacher and things like that, and those were fine, but I don't think they did what they were intended to do, which was to get you to have more sympathy or understanding of who Joe is. I felt like they were just extra additions in my opinion. So as I said, as a whole, the You series, there's still one more season coming out, I think later this year, season 5, which is going to be the last one. So hopefully I'll be taking a look at that one as well. I know I kind of ripped on some parts of the show, so hopefully it's a show that you enjoyed. As I said, as a Dexter fan, there were similarities. I think the big thing is just your show is when you're having a show with an inner monologue and then one character who you're mostly following their perspective, you have to really like that character. You have to do a really good job. I felt like with Dexter, you had Michael C. Hall, who really did a great job at carrying that show and being a character that you're rooting for. And I think just with this show, Joe is not a character that I personally was rooting for most of the time. There were parts where I'm like, oh, I hope he gets out of the situation, but more often than not, if Joe gets caught in season 5, I'm gonna be like, yeah, okay, good. That's probably should be how it ends. Whereas opposed to Dexter, even the way Dexter ended a couple times, I was not wanting Dexter's story to end. Whereas Joe's, I'm like, you probably deserve it. You've done some bad things and you should pay for it. And it's kind of absurd that you haven't to this point, but those are just my thoughts. Let me know what you guys think. Is this a show you really enjoyed? I obviously watched all 4 seasons, so liked it enough to continue it, but I would still put it more or less in that average category, but it's something that I had an interest in. It had some really great highs. The twist of season 2 was a really high for me, and the character development there. Season 3 was a bit campy and funny, but I feel like season 3 was great too. So coming off of those and going to season 4, I wasn't a big fan of, and I'm not sure the direction they're going to wind up going with their 5, but hopefully it's one that ends on a satisfying note. Let me know your guys' thoughts. What are your rankings for season 1 through 4? Love to hear your thoughts down in the comments below. Appreciate you guys and hope to talk to you again soon.